and welcome back to my small little library. In today's video, I want to talk about my journey into reading horror. I'm gonna have to preface this. I never really enjoyed horror. As a child, as a teenager, it wasn't something I would seek out, and the little bit I got through friends and family, I didn't really enjoy when I was younger. And I also really don't enjoy horror movies. There are a few I will watch and do enjoy, but most of them I just don't enjoy. I get scared way too easily when it comes to movies and stuff, and I don't really enjoy spending my time being scared by a movie, to be honest. I don't enjoy that. And so I never really thought horror books were the books for me, and for a long time I just didn't read horror books. Because of this misconception that if I don't like horror movies, I probably also won't like horror books. Over the last 2 years, pretty much, it has turned out that I was totally wrong to think I wouldn't like horror books. And so I thought, why not sit down and talk a little bit about the books I've read now, like bad books, medium or mediocre books, and the really good books I've read so far. And use this video as kind of a hub to discuss books, types of horror books, maybe where you could easily start, stuff like that, you know? And I will talk you through a little bit of the books I've read so far. I think I have read like roughly 65 horror books in like the last 2 years, which is quite a bit of books, and they are not only Stephen King, so there's a little bit of variety in here, and I can tell you what I did like, what I didn't like, and what I think good horror books for beginners are, because I was a beginner 2 years ago, and I think some horror books do tend to be a little bit easier to get into if you want to get into horror, and some tend to be a little bit more, I don't know, for if you already read horror on like a more regular basis and just want a good new horror book to read. So let's do that. Obviously, we're not gonna go through all of the horror books I've read. I think that would just take too long, but I took like 3-4 of every like star category, and I combined 1 and 2 stars because I did have a few, but not that many, which I'm really glad about. So we're gonna start with the worst ones I've read so far. And to be honest, most of these are older books. I at some point like acquired like a box of horror books, like older horror books, because I've heard that there are a lot of really good ones out there, and because I didn't know any authors, I bought like a box with like, I don't know, 20-30 horror books, and I've read a few of those now, and they're really hit and miss. Let's just leave it at that. The first one I want to talk about is Brainchild, by Andrew Neiderman. This one, really not good. You have pretty much like this girl who's really like socially, she's not really capable of social interaction. She's really bad at that, even though she has like a pretty normal family. And she starts doing experiments, and first they're just like harmless experiments, and then she goes towards animal experiments, and then she starts with humans, and in the end her father ends up to be, or like her father and her mother end up to be like her primary targets in the end. This book is like really pretty much all depends on the girl not understanding social interaction and social cues and stuff like that, and it's a really weird thing. It's just it wasn't really scary, which is something. There are horror books out there that aren't really scary, but that are still horror books, totally. But for me, if I read something like this, which is more like mostly like psychological horror, this was just really, really boring for most of the book. And then you have like a really, really short part in the end where there's the action, and that just was really not even enough, you know? I wanna... you have to have build-up, yeah, for sure, but you also have to have action, and here the action is like in 30 pages, just at the end. And so yeah, I really didn't enjoy this. And yeah, this is one from the book lot that I bought. Then the next two, all of these are... Well, no, we have one star book here. The Branch Child is 2 stars. This one is the only horror book I've ever given 1 star. It is called Ghost House by Claire McNally. It is supposed to be a haunted house story, and in the end it's just so weird because the ghosts, like, they all see them at the end, and there's like not like one ghost that haunts them, but like there are a lot of ghosts, and it's not an enjoyable haunted house. It's never scary what the guy does. It's really creepy, stalkerish stuff that the ghost does, which like really weird. Like, he's like a real stalker. He pretty much sexually assaults our main character. It's a really, really weird thing. It's not scary. Well, it is scary, but not like horror scary. It's just like really scary if you're a woman. Let's just like say it like it is. But yeah, I didn't enjoy this 1 second. It's really bad. And yeah, this was... Thank God it wasn't the first haunted house story I'd read. Maybe I wouldn't have picked up another after this one. But yeah, this is a really bad example for a haunted house story. Then the next one is something I've already talked about on this channel, which is The Hunting Season by John Coyne. This is like an anthropologist who wants to research some inbred hill people. They don't call themselves hill people, let's just say it like it is. And yeah, pretty much the story completely hinges on these people being psychopaths. Pretty much all of them being really bad, and yeah, there's a plot twist I didn't necessarily see coming, but this also tries to shock you a lot with like sexual assault and stuff like that. There are a lot of people in here getting murdered and stuff, but it's always has like this kind of funny undertone that you can't really take it seriously at all, because everything has a sexual undertone. But it's like a really creepy, weird sexual undertone that isn't scary. It's just like so out of control that it's not good anymore, you know? And yeah, I also didn't like the portrayal of like inbred hill people. That's the whole thing in and of itself. I didn't like it. I think you can do that if you do it right, but this just felt wrong, this book. Also 2 stars, because it wasn't the worst writing style, and there are some parts I thought were quite good, but yeah, all in all, it's really bad. And then we have the last 2-star book, and this one I was really sad about. This is called Mouthful of Birds by Samantha Schweblin, and I think all in all this has quite good reviews, but for me, this is a short story collection, and all of them are like really weird horror stories, which I do enjoy. But for me, these were just too short. This book only has a little over 200 pages, and there are 20 stories in here. So pretty much every story is roughly 10 pages, which is so short. So I personally felt all of these stories ended in the middle. Most of these stories were just really missing something. There were 1 or 2 in here that I thought were good and that I enjoyed, even though they were so short, but the other ones I just felt were really missing the story. So yeah, that is sadly why I didn't enjoy it. I wish this collection would come out with like double the length. Then I would have really enjoyed it. Some of the beginnings I really enjoyed, and then it just ended and I was like, where's the story? We weren't finished, but yeah. So yeah, bit sad about this one, because it's also such a pretty cover with all of the butterflies in front. I really like this, but yeah, sadly not for me, though I do like, though I do know that a lot of people like it actually. Then for the 3-star ones, we have this one, which is also a movie, The Ruins. This is Pretty much one of these classic, like, there's some young people who go on like a holiday, and one of them is like, yeah, let's go to this archaeological site because my brother went there and he hasn't talked to me, and yeah, let's go there. And they go there, and there are pretty much the indigenous people there, and they try to get them to go away, but they walk onto these ruins, and the indigenous people won't let them go down anymore, and then the horror begins. I liked it. I thought the book was too long. That is pretty much my main problem with the book. There's so much filler here that didn't necessarily have to be here, so I think that probably works way better as a movie than as the book. But even though I do like now reading horror books, I still don't enjoy watching horror movies, so I won't watch the movie. But yeah, maybe the movie version would work a lot better. But yeah, this is a lot of horror, body horror. It's a brutal book, but way too long. There were some scenes in there that didn't need to be. Also, there's like some really artificial drama with like there are two pairs, and then girls, boys, they never can let their hand off one of the other. And yeah, it was really weird when it comes to that, but I think the horror was well done, though. Then we have one that is pretty much a classic, I think, at this point, and that is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This one also got 3 stars from me. We have 2 orphans and a governess that pretty much would do everything to protect these children, even though she might imagine the threats that are there. She starts seeing things, she starts really getting more paranoid and paranoid, like stuff like that. This is really like a psychological horror more than anything else, which I do enjoy a psychological horror. I think mostly with this one, it is an older book. I thought it wasn't as, like, I didn't think it's necessarily scary. Because obviously you have like a very overprotective woman over these 2 children, and she's trying to like keep everything like away from the children, so there isn't much happening when it comes to that. And so yeah, I liked it, but I didn't think it's like something you necessarily need to read. Let's say it like that. I think it's a fine read if you are interested in more like older horror books, because older horror books definitely have a different kind of horror than modern horror books. There's definitely like a line there. And they are a little bit more like sophisticated. There isn't as much violence in there and stuff, so that is definitely in this one as well. But I do think it is quite a nice read. It is really, really short. So yeah, there isn't obviously that much to the story because the book is so short. But yeah, I find it enjoyable enough, but I don't think it's staying in your head long, I already forgotten a lot about the story just because it wasn't memorable enough. So that is why it gave it 3 stars. Now then, let's come to the 4 stars. I have a few more books than in the first 2 categories there. Because obviously these are the books that you technically want to read. I think 4 stars are always like a good basis, and I also think these are the books that you could really, really well start with if you want to get in horror. And first of all, we'll start with Buskill. This one came out, I think, last year, and I picked it up on a whim. It's by Jeff Jacobson, and it is fantastic body horror. You have a missionary family who goes to the Amazon jungle to do their missionary work there, which, like, problematic as it is. And their child gets stung by some wasps. And they go back on the plane, and the wasps come out. Say it like this. And every time these wasps get a new host, they grow in size according to host. And yeah, the people fly back to America, and the wasps land in America, and all hell breaks loose, and it is fantastic. I really enjoyed this book. It is a shorter one, which I think the length is really fitting for this book. There isn't much filler in there. There's a little bit of a romance in there that technically isn't necessary, but like a lot of people enjoy it, so yeah. I thought this was fine enough, but yeah, and then you have pretty much like a scientist, like a young scientist woman who researches wasp and stuff. That's one of our main characters. And then we have an ex-prisoner, or that he's technically a prisoner at the beginning of the story, but yeah, some prisoners who band together and start exterminating the threat, and it's a lot of fun, it's a lot of action, pretty much the beginning is a little bit slow just to like get things started, but then there's a lot of action in here, there's a lot of death in here, and a lot of body horror. If you think you might like body horror, I think this is a really, really good start, because it's short-ish, it's full of action, and I think this will give you like a good idea what body horror can do. So yeah, this one, really good. Then we have the next one, which was a really big surprise for me, but I think is also a really, really good starting point, and that is Clown in a Cornfield. I think part 2 might be out already, or it might come out this year. Yeah, this pretty much, we have a girl whose father pretty much takes her, and they move into this little city, and she tries to make friends, and she goes to a party, and at some point there's the clown that comes out of the cornfield and starts to kill people. This is really much a classical splatter film in a book form, which is why I absolutely loved it. It starts a little bit slower, a little bit teeny movie-ish, which I think might be a little bit typical of slashers. I don't watch those films, but I mean, you all know probably Scream and stuff like that. So yeah, it starts slow as like a teeny thing, and then it turns into really, really good horror, really brutal. Loved the story. Yeah, it's the young versus the old, pretty much, and I would definitely recommend this. And I will definitely pick up the second part, though I'm really interested where that is going, because of the end of this one. But yeah, really, really nice horror, really good starting point, if you ask me. It is brutal, but I don't think it's like too much, because books can be too much when it comes to horror. Like, there's some stuff out there you might not want to read. So yeah, this one really good as well. Another one that is made a movie is Treasure Island by Dennis Lian. Really love this one. Also haven't watched the movie. Really psychological horror. We have two cops who investigate an escaped patient in this asylum, and it is on an island, and there comes a storm, and so they can't leave the island. And then things happen. Purely psychological. Really, really good. This is one, if you can't do the whole violence stuff, which some people can't, but maybe do still want to read horror, I would say start with this one. It is incredible. There are plot twists there are things that really leave you like, oh my god, did I understand that correctly? Like, this one really wrecks your brain. I absolutely loved it. It isn't the biggest, but I thought, like, some things could have been cut down a little bit, but all in all, I think the length is fine. And yeah, if you like horror movies, you also could just watch the movie. As far as I know, the depiction is pretty spot on, so you could do both. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. And then we have two more for 4 stars, which I think are important to mention. The first one is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Especially since now it came out that there will be a second movie, which I think is quite interesting. This is so different from the movie. The movie is obviously inspired by the book, but I think you have to read the book. If you enjoyed the movie, read the book. I think it's really, really important. The focus here is kind of a little bit of a different thing, because this book, yeah, there is like typical violence and horror, because there are like vampire zombie-ish beings, but this one focuses also on the psychology behind being alone out there and thinking you're the last one alive and don't know what you really should do. There's a lot of like suffering in here. Also, yeah, the dog is also in the book. Um, so, I won't say anything more, but yeah, the dog is in here as well. But yeah, this is it is short, but it's really a punch in the gut, to be honest. And yeah, I would say read it. I personally loved the film, but I think I loved it even more after reading the book, and I really do like the book. Um, Also, the ending is really interesting. It's really different from the film, so if you want like an alternative ending, go for this one. Also, I would hope that the second movie maybe takes the ending of the book to then do a movie on it. I don't think if it's possible, but yeah, I would like to see that because this ending just like really hits different. And then one more classic, because for me, I'm Legend is also a classic. We have Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. If you watched the series, you probably know a little bit about it already. For me, this is one of the best haunting house books out there. Also rather short. I do enjoy short horror. I think horror really lends itself to like shorter books to make it more intense. This one I think is really really great when it comes to the whole like psychological horror behind a haunted house. Yeah, it's one of the originals and it really does it well. I felt for the characters for the whole book. It's really like you don't want to be alone in a house after reading this. Yeah, it really packs a punch as well. Um, I also watched the series. It's one I forced myself to watch because I like the book so much. But yeah, really, really great. The horror is so good in this one. Because yeah, you obviously have a lot where you're like, oh, a haunted house, like lights flickering and doors closing and stuff like that. But I think this one it does it so well. It's not like really generic. I mean, it is generic at some point just because it is so old. So a lot of the things came from this one, for example, that we now know as the haunted house things. But yeah, one of the originals really should pick it up. I also think this is a good starting point just because it is really old, so it doesn't have the really potent horror in there. There isn't any kind of violence really in there, but it is really a scary book. So then we are now coming to my favorites. What you might have seen is that there isn't one Stephen King book in there right now. I have a lot of Stephen King books that have gotten 4 stars from me. But I didn't want to mention them for the 4-star books, just because I also have a few Stephen King books that I personally think are 5 stars. And I mean, everybody knows that if you want to read horror, you can go to Stephen King. I think there are a lot of good starting points from Stephen King, but yeah, there are so many books, and I haven't obviously read all of them, that I don't really want to recommend a Stephen King book. Like, you can look his bibliography up and then just pick one of the horror books from him. I wanted to mention a 5-star book from him, which, like a classic from Stephen King, it is great. I haven't watched the movies. The It films are one of the movies that I still have on my list that I will watch eventually, just because I am absolutely in love with this book. The only downside of this one is the length of it. My copy has 1,200 pages, I think. Just over 1,000 pages, which is really long. I can understand that maybe would like make you not want to read it, but I read it last year for Halloween, a few like 30 pages a day or something like that, which is really doable, at least for me, and I absolutely loved it. I think this is one of the best when it comes to psychological horror mixed with violence, because there's violence in here, but I think the main point of the horror is psychological horror, and it is a fear-based horror in here, which not a lot of horror books do that. I mean, yeah, okay, haunted house, we're all fearful of like lights flickering and stuff, but this is fear is the horror. The main point is that our main characters, which are children in the beginning and then in the second part are adults, have to face their fears. That is the basis of the horror in the book, and I think that is just brilliant. Which is why I love this so much, because I think it's quite the unique approach, and I think it's a good approach because for me, for example, I hate horror with dolls. I cannot do that. I haven't tried to do that in a book form yet because, yeah, I tried watching Annabelle. We don't have to talk about how bad that went. So yeah, for me, fear-based is just a really, really impactful horror, and yeah, this one I would recommend. As I said, there are a lot of other Stephen King books you could read. One other favorite of mine, for example, is Carrie, which is a really physical horror book. So it is a lot of psychological horror. So Stephen King has all of the different horror kinds, but I think the one that does it is the best and is the most different to other horror authors is definitely it. Would recommend to read it. Take your time with it, let it sink in. I think that makes it even more powerful, and then read it and maybe watch the films because they are supposed to be really, really good. Then the next one I have to talk about it is an absolute classic. This is Dracula. I have the Penguin classic cloth-bound edition. Yeah, for me, this pretty much is the starting point for horror for me. I tried reading Dracula when I was like 16, 17. I couldn't get through the beginning because the beginning is quite a lot of travel descriptions. I now really enjoy that, but I do know that a lot of people aren't the biggest fans of long travel descriptions. So if you don't like it, maybe skip this one. But yeah, for me, this is a real classic. It is a lot of psychological horror again, even though it is about vampires. But yeah, I mean, you know the story. I think it's just one of those you should read, you know, just once. I understand that it isn't for everyone, but I think this, together with like Frankenstein and The Picture of Dorian Gray, are just like, if you are interested in classics and want to also begin getting into horror, this one would absolutely be a must read. Yeah, and then we have two left of my 5-star horror recommendations. One is a short story collection, which I will do last. And then we have one that is also a newer book, which is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. This is mermaid horror, which I thought to be really, really great. I also haven't had... I know there are a few mermaid horror books out there, but they are all newer books. So, yeah, I think that might just be a newer phenomenon. But I really loved this one. This is one... Sadly, I think the impact is only on the first read, so I won't tell you too much about it. But our main character has a sister that was lost at sea because she was supposed to film a documentary, and the ship came back without the people on it. And so she volunteers to go with the next documentary team to find out what happened to the first boat. And the documentary is pretty much about mermaids, but I mean, it's a mockumentary more than a documentary team. So yeah, that is all I'm gonna say. I really think the first time around it hits the most. Absolutely brutal. You have to know that, and I loved the concept of the mermaids and stuff. Really, really great. I think sometimes it's good to vilify things that we look at so positively, even though mermaids technically do have a dark history when it comes to like the Greeks and stuff. Mermaids did make sailors die, pretty much, but yeah. So I really enjoyed this one. There is like a prequel to this one. I like the prequel as well. I gave it 5 stars as well. I personally loved the way around I read it, this one first and then the prequel. I like that a lot more than the other way around, so do with that what you will. But yeah, this one is a great one. And then the last horror book I want to really recommend is also one I've got in that box with the other horror books, and that is Various States of Decay by Matt Hayward. This is a short story collection, but you have also longer and shorter short stories in here. I don't know, this one just really hit me. The stories in here are really, really different. You have like a broad spectrum of horror in this book. But they all really, really hit me. Some of them in here are like body horror, then there's a lot of classic horror that is more on the psychological side. But yeah, these stories are so different, but all really scary, that I thought that that is a collection. If you don't want to commit to like a horror genre or a subgenre of horror, or like you don't really know what you like when it comes to horror, I think this is a good one to like get an overview what horror can do. But only in like short stories, so you don't have to read like 15 200-page books to get to know horror. You can do that with these short stories that aren't as long. Yeah, this was one of the biggest surprises, like getting in random books and then picking them up and reading them. So also these stories aren't all by the author. He just collected all of these stories and put them in one to pretty much showcase his favorite short stories from horror, which I think is quite a good thing. And yeah, for me that was really fitting. And so I would say if you can pick it up to get started, the stories are really great. Yeah, so this is pretty much my beginning with horror. I'm still not sure which horror subgenre I like the most. I really enjoy body horror, with like things like Baskerville, really like disgusting things in horror books I like to read. I don't like violence as much. For me, body horror and violence doesn't have to be the same thing. Obviously, body horror implies that there's also a lot of death a lot of the time. But I like changing bodies and discussing forms of things and stuff like that. That is what I really like when it comes to body horror, and not as much the violence thing. I think a lot of like violence is okay in books. I can live with that depending on how the description is of the violence. But I'm for one hate really senseless violence. So if a horror book is just pretty much like killing for the sake of killing, that isn't really much for me. What I also absolutely love is psychological horror. I think that is like the hardest form to really excel at, because it's easy to make it unbelievable. But I think if you make it good, it really like hits you. And yeah, so that is something I really, really enjoy. Because sometimes I think making someone afraid is way more impactful than showing him like a dead body, you know? So yeah, that was pretty much like my little introduction to horror and the books I've read, or a showcase of books I've read, and yeah, what got me into horror, and which is why I definitely will pick up more horror, and not only Stephen King, but like different authors, and yeah. If you know a few good horror authors that I should look up, please leave them in the comments below. I would like to expand my horizon when it comes to horror, just because I really learn to enjoy it, and that just because I don't enjoy a horror movie doesn't mean I can't enjoy a horror book, you know? So yeah, also, books to horror movies, please leave them down below. I have a lot of good experience with that. With books that were then made into movies where I won't watch the movie, but I love reading the books. So yeah, please leave those in the comments below as well, if you have any that I should definitely pick up. And yeah, if you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye!